So excited to welcome two great advocates for women's reproductive rights here with us tonight. Planned Parenthood of Virginia, let's hear it for them in the room. And we have NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. We're so excited for the program tonight. So we're glad you're here tonight with us, making some good trouble. And tonight we have RaeAnn Pickett, the Communications Director from Planned Parenthood of Virginia. We have Lucy Hartman, who's the Organizing Director of the Planned Parenthood of Virginia. And then Han Jones, the Political Director of Planned Parenthood, is also here. And then the NARAL Pro-Choice team is also in the room. We have Ana Owens, the Campaigns Director, and let me say it for
Michaela,
me. Michaela.
You were almost there.
I want to say Michaela, then I'm like, I know it's Michaela. Michaela, Communications Director. Good to know how to say a name when you're right. Thank you for that. Also, I am going to welcome you all and hand it over in good hands to Han, who will get it started, and then they will be telling you what you'll be doing tonight, and we will be supporting their efforts. So thank you for being here, everybody. Go for it, Han. Thank you.
So thank you so much for having us today, Network Nova. We absolutely love y'all, and we're so excited to be here with you today. I am really excited about this event. So today we are going to be talking about how to talk about the issues of abortion and reproductive rights. These issues are incredibly important. They are everywhere right now, and we're going to be hearing about them a lot throughout this election cycle. That's not going to decrease. We know that a lot of the electeds that we're talking about, and a lot of the new candidates are making this really front and center in their races. Even just recently, Glenn Youngkin was in the news for his very extreme views on abortion. So today we're going to be getting everyone really comfortable with talking about these issues. We're going to be talking about what the landscape currently looks like, how many Virginians support the right to a safe, available abortion. We're also going to be talking about what language really works in conveying these issues, what to avoid, and how to bridge and pivot to the issues that might be more key to a campaign that you're talking about. We're going to tell you about how to tell your personal story, which can be really, really important in moving people on these issues. And we're also going to talk about when it's time to try to leave a conversation and how to extricate yourself from a conversation that's gone south. There's going to be practice as well as explanation, and we're going to leave lots and lots of space for questions. So with all of that, I want to thank you for being here to learn about this really important issue. I want to tell you a little bit about Planned Parenthood and what we do. In addition to our political advocacy, which we're doing here today, we also are healthcare providers, and we provide all types of care. Of course, we are proud to offer abortion services, but in addition to that, we offer a range of other healthcare, including primary healthcare. We do STI screenings, cancer screenings, as well as birth control. And actually, we also see men and trans folks, which not everyone knows about. We are one of the largest trans healthcare providers in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we also offer vasectomies, which is a new thing for us, so that we can really offer reproductive healthcare to everyone. And I'm going to pass it over to Ana to tell a little bit about NARAL, our partners here with us today.
Thanks so much, Han. So NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia is the political and policy leader of the pro-choice movement in Virginia. We build political power for pro-choice Virginians, and we are working to ensure every Virginian can make the personal reproductive healthcare decisions that are best for themselves and their families without shame or political interference. And this includes preventing unintended pregnancy, having healthy pregnancies and births, and choosing safe and legal abortion. And all of this is to say that we do a wide range of advocacy work, everything from legislative advocacy to electoral advocacy to public education campaigns to culture work, to try to bust shame and stigma around abortion and other forms of reproductive health care.
Thanks so much, Ana. And I think it's really important as we're talking about how to talk about abortion to know where we currently are at in Virginia and where we're at nationally. So nationally, we know abortion rights have been under attack. Right now, there is a case going to the Supreme Court that could overturn or significantly whittle away at Roe v. Wade. which is what is the Supreme Court case currently making abortion legal across the nation. But in Virginia, we've actually made great strides as of late, thanks in large part to our progressive majority in the House of Delegates. Right now, we have been able to roll back decades of onerous restrictions with RIPA. And in this last session alone, we've expanded contraception access and removed the ban on abortion coverage being available on the state marketplace. We still have a long way to go, though. Even though some of these things have been huge strides, some people are still unable to access care because of their zip code, their immigration status, or their socioeconomic status. One of the reasons that we have really prioritized RaeA, the Reproductive Health Equity Act, which would ensure that regardless of who you are, where you come from, you can get the reproductive health care you need. So how do we talk about these things? How do we get these things? I'm going to turn it over to Michaela from NARAL to talk about how many people actually support abortion.
Thanks, Han. If we could go ahead and get our lovely presentation shared with everyone so they can see, I've got some graphs and things that will be helpful to talk about this. So yeah, let's talk about repro. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so before we hop into the messaging, like Han said, I think it's important to look at the history of abortion restrictions and voters' opinions about abortion access, not only in Virginia, but also in the country. So here we have this great chart from Guttmacher Institute that shows us for four decades ago in 1973, the Roe v. Wade decision legalized abortion in every state. And since then, anti-abortion activists have been pushing for as many abortion restrictions as they can come up with and actually convince lawmakers to pass. While their movement has kind of ebbed and flowed, like we can see here, the 2010 wave of elections that transferred power to Republican lawmakers in dozens of states resulted in a tidal wave of abortion restrictions. You can see the spike right there around 2010. Okay, next. But over the last few years, some states are fighting really, really hard to pass proactive legislation to protect access to abortion care. So after the 2016 presidential election and the subsequent shift in the Supreme Court, some states have ramped up their efforts to pass laws that ensure that abortion remains safe, available, and legal in their states, regardless of what happens at the federal level. But the opposition currently is still outpacing us. Next. Right now, we're seeing, whoops, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide here. Okay, so this is a high-level look at the reproductive healthcare policy landscape right now in Virginia. In 2019, RIPA was passed, which removed medically unnecessary restrictions on abortion services that impacted both pregnant people and providers. None of these restrictions were rooted in science, and they were put in place only to shame people seeking abortion and decrease access. This year, during the 2021 legislative session, the exchange bill was passed, which removed the ban on abortion coverage through the state health benefits exchange. This bill gave the option for abortion coverage to be offered to those paying for insurance plans purchased through the exchange. So previously, abortion coverage was banned from the exchange completely. And then RaeA is a proposed bill which expands access to marginalized communities that have been largely excluded from previous reproductive health legislation. This bill increases access to all Virginians, regardless of immigration status, income, gender identity, or type of insurance. Okay, next. So right now we are seeing some of the highest support for abortion in years, and the legislation that I just talked about kind of reflects that. Recent polling has shown that the assault on abortion access is backfiring, and polling clearly shows that the vast majority of Americans support legal access to abortion and do not want these extreme bans. There are a lot of polls out there, and it's helpful to look at a lot of different types of polling because we want to see the trends. And the numbers here come from the Pew Research Center in Washington and some Washington Post, ABC News polls that show support for legal abortion matches the high point, which is in the 1990s, with 61% saying abortion should be legal in all or most cases. So when looking at the impact of the current debate on the main measurements of abortion attitudes, we find that public support for abortion continues. Next. Okay, so we continue to see that abortion is an important voting issue, more for Democratic voters than Republican voters, which are not a big surprise there. This survey from December 2020, when you look at the partisan breakdowns, you see that 71% of Democrats want to vote for a candidate who supports rights and access to abortion, compared to only 51% of Republicans who vote for a candidate that's against rights and access to abortion. So more Republicans than Democrats say this issue doesn't make a difference in their vote. So all of that tells us that Democrats have more to lose by abandoning their abortion rights. Next. So what people want in Virginia. This poll was done by Public Policy Polling in 2019, and the key findings note that Virginians are pretty consistent with national polling results when it comes to their views on access to abortion. The majority of Virginia voters believe that abortion should be legal. The majority believes that a woman should be able to get the care, or a pregnant person should be able to get the care they need during pregnancy, regardless of geographical or financial barriers. And majority of Virginia voters believe that a pregnant person should be able to make the decision to end a pregnancy, endangering their life or health. So all of that is to say that Virginia is pretty consistent, skewing slightly higher in favor of abortion access compared to the national polling results. Next. Oh, and I will now pass it over to Rae, who will talk about messaging, do's and don'ts, and all that good stuff that makes us better and more effective communicators. So Rae, I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michaela. My name is RaeAnn Pickett. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the communications director for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia. And you have heard a lot of information over the last 17 minutes. Okay, there's a lot of polling, there's a lot of data, there was a lot of maps, there's a lot of legislation, there's a lot of acronyms, right? How do we boil all of that down to make this conversation as simple and accessible as abortion itself could be, right? We can do that through three main things, right? We want to center the individual. We want to correct misinformation. And when we do that, we're able to bust stigma. So the first part of this, right, is making sure that folks know when you're having this discussion that abortion is a personal decision, right? Some folks will say, this is about health and safety. There's legislation that needs to do this. There's this, there's this. Ultimately, right, no matter what we feel about abortion, we can agree that it is only for that individual to decide, right? And decisions about their reproductive health should be made between the patient and their clinician. And that legislators or legislation don't play a part in that, right? When we're able to sort of bring it back up to this aerial view, we're able to take ourselves out of that, to take our judgment, our stigma, whatever we bring to that conversation with that, and say, you know what, wait a minute, this is really about an individual, a real person, their real life. And we can go to the next slide. So the next piece of that is that support for abortion is high, right? Support for abortion is high and abortion is safe, right? So when people say this is about health and safety, right, you're able to say, actually, abortion is 99% safe, right? Has a 99% safety rating, and 77% of everybody believes that abortion should be accessible, legal, and more people than that in Virginia believe that, right? So wait a minute. We have a lot of misinformation that we need to correct, right? Abortion is safe, support for abortion is high, And it doesn't matter how we feel about those things, right? When it comes down to the facts, these things, these legislations, these city ordinances, other things that you see, right? It's not about health and safety, right? Things that have to do with health and safety are conversations that are made between the individual and their clinician. And we can go to the next slide. This is, if you take nothing away, this is one of the biggest things, okay? I have a groundbreaking assertion to bring to you all. People who do not identify as women have abortions. Women have abortions. Moms have abortions. Dads have abortions, right? So when we are talking about reproductive health, when we are talking about abortion specifically, right, it is up to the 44 people on this call who are involved in their communities, who care deeply and passionately about this issue and a ton of other issues, by the way. It is so important that we really think about the way that we use gendered language and the stigma that reinforces, right? I try to always say what my pronouns are, because I never want someone else to feel like they should say what their pronouns are because it may be more obvious, what their gender could be, right? Or it may make for an uncomfortable conversation. I would rather the discomfort come when someone else is like, oh, well, I guess I have to share my pronouns too, who can be in a position of power, right? So when we're thinking about gendered language, it is very easy to just default to women when we're talking about abortion. If you just make a simple shift and say people, humans, individuals, right? That is going to make a huge difference. It's going to help make normal, right? It's going to help normalize the idea that you don't just have to say women when you're talking about abortion, right? It leaves that door open. It's not like a big rubber stamp on it, right? But if you do want to put a big rubber stamp on it, which I highly encourage, right? You can really just be inclusive. You can say women and transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people face barriers to safe legal abortion, period, right? It's true. And when you're able to say that and you're able to call attention to it, it's really, really important. Like when you know better, you do better, right? And so now we know what things happen, right? When things are stigmatized, how bad it can be, how bad it can feel, right? And so as all of us on this call, when you take things out with you, that is one thing that is true when we're talking about abortion and repro, and also in all other instances. And I think there should be one other slide. Yes. So just a few reminders, right? One, right? Don't center yourself in the discussion, right? If you're having a conversation with someone, and when I say someone, I'm talking about a casual conversation in progressive spaces. Maybe you're in a economics coalition, right? Maybe you do something for like your school board, right? You can talk about abortion there too, right? One, people in those spaces have abortions, right? Maybe they want to feel like, oh man, thank God that person, felt that way. And then they also know that they can be safe around you, right? And do center the individual, right? Always come back when in doubt, when you feel like the conversation is like, you're like, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about ordinances. I want to talk about the individual. I want to talk about the person. And I think that is, I think that's really important. Other things that we when I say avoid and instead use, this one is again correcting a false premise. It is not just doctors who are able to provide first trimester abortion care in Virginia, thanks in large part in all parts to the Reproductive Health Protection Act. So now, right, when you say doctors, you really exclude a whole host of advanced practice clinicians who can also provide abortion care, right? So again, you know better, you're able to say, actually, yeah, it's more than just doctors, right? Just like I go to my primary care and I sometimes see a nurse practitioner, right? That's what your relationship can be like with your abortion provider, right? This is a big one too, is when we're talking about abortion, abortion is healthcare, and making the decision to have an abortion is where healthcare comes in, right? We're not talking about someone's choice. When I think of their choice, I think of all of the mechanisms that go into their decision making. That could be anything, right? If they have a faith leader, if they, have other children, if they have economic issues, right? That choice is not a conversation that I or anyone should be invited into, right? Unless it is with that person, right? So when we're talking about abortion, it's really important that we center the decision, right? It doesn't matter what brought you to this place. What matters is that you are at this place and you deserve to make this decision with the consultation of a clinician, right? And then another thing, right, is people say, I don't know if this might be a little bit more outdated, but termination, because it's a very technical phrase, right? People say weeks, trimesters, late term, early term, right? This is all very medical, right? I am not a clinician. I cannot safely, from a place of expertise, talk about what a termination is, what a term is, what any type of thing like that, right? And you shouldn't feel like you need to do that either, right? We can call it what it is. It's an abortion. You end a pregnancy, right? Terminate and termination sounds a little scary. It's really just healthcare, right? And I think I have another slide about do's and don'ts. Yes, so don't reinforce stigma and shame, right? And ways that people do that are when you say, it's a really heartbreaking choice to make, right? One, we're assigning our judgment, right, that abortion should or does involve some sort of heartbreak or tragedy, right? That is just not true for everyone, right? Everyone can have an entire range of emotions that go into making their decision and also go into, the way they experience the procedure itself, right? That is why it's complicated. And again, it is personal. When we say, it's a joyful decision, right? Or heartbreaking, that's really not for us to decide. And again, when we say things like fetal abnormality, anomaly, right? We are not qualified, right, to say what that could be. When there's a diagnosis or a severe diagnosis, right? That's what those things are, right? That's what happens when you receive a diagnosis like that. And then lastly, this is a big one. People say, keep abortion safe, legal, and rare, right? Rare is in the eye of the beholder in a way, right? Because abortion is rare in places like Texas and, in other states, right? Our neighboring states. That rareness is not really what most of us mean when we say safe, legal, and rare. We mean that we want to reduce rates of unintended pregnancy. We want someone to be able to choose a variety of other things so that they wouldn't need to have an abortion, right? However, that is also not for us to decide, right? Being able to recenter the person in that decision-making process is going to allow you to avoid a lot of the things that cause stigma and reinforce shame. And I think I'm throwing it over to Lucy.
Thank you, Rae. Hi, everybody. I'm Lucy Hartman. I'm the organizing director with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia. Thank you to Michaela, Han, and Rae for everything that you've imparted to us thus far. My main gist here is to talk about telling our own stories. One thing that's really important about storytelling is that it demystifies abortion. It also demystifies Planned Parenthood. So a lot of people think a lot of things about a charged environment, let's say, where healthcare, abortion care is provided. But it's our job, as Rae mentioned, to keep things based on the individual's experience and to center humans. So we use our stories in the media to humanize an issue, to inspire people to donate to our cause. We use stories at rallies to mobilize people to support and take action on a specific issue. We also use our stories to connect with supporters at meetings, phone banks, and even canvasses. I personally have had that opportunity to do all of the above. So stories allow us to demonstrate and develop leadership as individuals. And when we tell our stories, we assert ourselves as leaders, and the story we share is a tool of change. So as part of our theory of change at Planned Parenthood, we center patient advocates and patient voices. So there are three parts of a public-facing narrative in terms of our organizing structure here. The first is the story of self, which invites others to be in a relationship with you as the storyteller. There's the story of us. It invites others to join your community, and it really motivates people to learn more about you and why you do the work that you do. And then there's the story of now, which invites others to take action. So I'll give you an example, a very abridged version of my own story. I was once a Planned Parenthood patient when I lived on the West Coast. So I was in Los Angeles and I had lost my job. I had just gotten sober and I was in a pretty precarious situation where I did not have health care. And so when I lived in Los Angeles, the only thing I knew to do was to seek primary care at Planned Parenthood. I had made a lot of unruly, unsavory decisions. I had put myself in a lot of dangerous situations. So I knew inherently, because of the work that Planned Parenthood does, that I would receive non-judgmental, compassionate care. So I became a Planned Parenthood patient. And then fast forward, I moved back to the East Coast. And of course, our previous administration came into power. So I took that as a call to action myself to work for a place and pay it forward that made my life so much better and provided that non-judgmental, compassionate healthcare that I sought and did receive. So I will also add, once I started working for Planned Parenthood, I became a patient again, this time as an employee of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia and Planned Parenthood, Virginia League for Planned Parenthood specifically. That was the only place in my entire life where a primary care doctor took seriously my hypertension. So I actually got medicated for that. And it turns out it's been a lifelong issue. So I cannot personally say enough good things about the care I received. So that's my story in a nutshell. And specifically, when we look at each part of my public narrative, let's use as an example, the story of self is really what called me to this work in the first place. The story of us is why we as a collective are called and why we matter in this effort. So I mentioned the previous administration. It's like Voldemort. He who will not be named, in my opinion. I'd rather not, but you know who I'm talking about. And that really elicits a lot of reaction from other people. I'm sure the people who I am talking to feel those same things that I felt when that administration took power. So that's bringing in the us. That's also bringing folks into the mission of Planned Parenthood, generally speaking. And then the story of now, which is what we're called to do right now. So what is our story of now? And at this point, what we can take a look at is, as a reproductive health freedom rights organization, our main goal is, at least on the C4 side of things politically, is to endorse candidates who are running for office who we know will support us legislatively. I mean, Rae and Michaela mentioned the Reproductive Health Protection Act, and truly that affects numerous Virginians. A lot of people don't even realize that these onerous restrictions have been rolled back. So what I want to focus on here today is to let you know that the way we look at stories is each story has a challenge, a choice, and an outcome. So there's this full circle nature that creates a sense of hope and adds a human dimension to issues like legislation or policy that might go over folks' heads in any other context. So one thing that I do want to mention that's really important, there are two ways as a storyteller that we can understand the world. There's through our head, which is the strategy and analysis part of things. And then there's through our heart, which is speaking the language of the heart, so to speak, to other people who can understand your story and then develop their own motivation moving forward. So in order to enable others to achieve a shared purpose, we must use both our head and our heart. And stories are the heart of the matter. So you will learn strategy from us. We'll have our breakout rooms so we can practice. But it's important to learn that you as a messenger, let's say a trusted messenger, you might be the only exposure that an individual has to places like Planned Parenthood or NARAL or reproductive rights or freedom. You might be the only person who's carrying that message to another person. So it's really important to stay grounded in why you do the work you do, what motivates you, and what brings you here today. So the key word there is that stories move us to action by engaging our emotions, and emotions tell us what we value in the world. So when we hear stories that make us feel a certain way, those stories remind us of our core values, and we experience our values through emotions. And on a human to human level, it helps us relate. It's relational organizing at its core. So stories are a tool that we can use as leaders to move ourselves, to motivate people, and I know Ana will talk about this soon, but moving from a place of just feeling motivated or engaged to a place of agitation and action. What are we going to do about it? Why does this story matter? How does this affect me? So stories have a common structure. There's a plot, something happens to the character. In this case, the character is you. And then the character needs to make a choice. So faced with a decision, you basically explore what choice you made. And then that choice yields an outcome, and that outcome teaches a moral. What did you do about your situation and why? So what happens when there's no challenge is basically that there's no outcome. Therefore, we're not offering hope to other people. So we really want to dig deep and find ways that our story can provide hope to other people. So there's a couple of things, I'll wrap up quickly here, but a couple of things that I want to go over, and I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about what your story can look like. What do you want to focus on? And so before you decide what part of your story to tell, there are some questions I want you to think about. So number one, what will I be calling others to do? So what is it that you actually want people to engage in? What action do you want them to take? Number two, what values move you to take action and might also inspire others to similar action? So showing by doing is important in this instance. Number three, what stories can I tell from my own life about specific people or events that would show, rather than tell, how I learned or acted on those values? So thinking about the experiences in your life that have shaped the values that you hold dear and that call you to leadership in whatever campaign it is that you're working on. So you could think back to family and childhood. You can go as far back as when you're a little kid. Think about your parents, your family, your childhood growing up, your community, your role models, what it was like in school. Some folks choose to talk about sex ed, and that was really when they started to get engaged as a child, even in middle school. I personally did not have a great exposure to good sex ed. I went to a Catholic school, and let's just say I didn't really learn about my own anatomy, my own body, until I became pregnant. And my doula, who is on this call today, Rae, had to teach me about how my body functioned to give birth to a child. So that shows you where I was at. You can think about life choices you've made when you've been faced with indecision at school, with your career, your partner, your family. What hobbies or interests or talents lead you to these core values that you hold? Your faith, overcoming huge obstacles in your life. You can also think about organizing experiences. I know a lot of us on this call have experience in our own communities doing this work. So what was your first experience of organizing? What is your connection to key books or people who have moved you, and what role models you have? So again, just to reiterate and to close, what's really important to keep in mind is the challenge, choice, outcome structure of storytelling. And we can definitely practice that together as a team. I do have some sample topics. I won't go through all of them. There's like 100 listed on here, so you're welcome. But generally speaking, we can talk about contraception and family planning, the healthcare you've received from places like Planned Parenthood. And then of course there's abortion. So again, to wrap up, one thing that storytelling does very effectively is demystifying and destigmatizing abortion. So it's really important that our stories are out there and they can affect others, and they are impactful more than we might even know. So I think at this time, I will hand things over to Ana.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. And I don't think I introduced myself before. So my name is Ana Owens. I am the campaigns director for NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. And I use they, them, or she, her pronouns. So I have slides. I'm not sure who there we go. There we go. Awesome. So Lucy just talked about storytelling, and I'm going to talk about what an effective conversation looks like, knowing when you can push people and knowing when you need to pivot or bail on a conversation entirely. Next slide, please. Perfect. So a little bit about the anatomy of an effective conversation. So everything that we're talking about today is in the context of door knocking. Although when I say canvassing, I mean any conversation in which you are trying to move someone from one political viewpoint to another one. So I like to say that I am constantly canvassing my friends and family around political issues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what an effective canvas conversation looks like, but just know that that can either be on the doors or in your personal life doing sort of relational organizing. Yes, Thanksgiving dinner is a perfect canvas opportunity. So what makes an effective conversation? So the basic structure that you all, I know, are very familiar with, as Network Nova does a ton of great door knocking every election season, is that you knock on someone's door and you tell them that you're in the neighborhood to have a conversation about whatever you might be canvassing about, whether that's an elected official, some other issue. For us, it's abortion or reproductive health care issues. And in general, you ask them if they are for or against whatever you're talking about. And then you may ask a few questions to delve deeper into their background with the subject. And then you share your story that Lucy just talked about and ask if they've had similar experiences. So effective canvassing is really grounded in the belief that what moves people into action are conversations and stories and emotional connections that slowly change our perspective. So you're really planting seeds so that you can come back and have a follow-up conversation with them and slowly sort of pull them along. A lot of us, and I'll speak for myself as well, are really used to relying on facts and research in our conversations around social justice issues especially, but a lot of us fall into the trap of using statistics, facts, research around abortion. And we know from a lot of experience and research that doesn't actually work very well. So instead of trying to convince people with stats and figures and numbers and that kind of thing, we're here to have an open and honest conversation with people and help build our understandings of each other and where we're coming from. people change their own minds. We don't change people's minds. So people don't care about who you think they should be. They don't care about if you think they're wrong. They care about who they want to be. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is around trying to find sort of our shared value systems and building empathy around the real lived experiences of people and having really authentic conversations, because people can definitely tell when you're just nodding along versus when you're really trying to authentically figure out where they're coming from and relate to them on a personal level. And effective canvassing conversation, I think this is sort of a huge takeaway, is that it should be mostly listening. So 70% of an effective canvassing conversation should be listening. Your goal should be to get them to talk. Of course, you want to share your personal story and make sure that you connect with them, but that really shouldn't be the meat of the conversation. So the main takeaway here is when we see each other not as the person who's right and the person who's wrong, but as two people who are both complicated and both learning, we'll be able to build compassion within ourselves that sustains us through difficult conversations. This shows externally as well. People will be more eager to engage with you when they don't sense judgment or condescension. And so my next slide is around what types of people we're trying to engage with. So this is what I like to call the conversation continuum. So it looks kind of like a bell curve, as you can see. So on one end, we have sort of, for lack of a better word, a perfect conservative, a classic sort of hardcore conservative. These in the repro movement are the folks who are, like literally outside of clinics with graphic posters calling us murderers and things like that. So these are people who cannot be moved. No matter what you say, you are not going to move them. And on the other side of that spectrum is probably most of the folks on this call, sort of very, very engaged, the type of like sort of perfect as far as one can be, progressive. So people who are totally with us, they don't need to be convinced either. They're not going to be moved towards any kind of direction. But you can see that everyone else sort of fits in the middle of these two polar opposites. This is where most people are. Most people don't fit easily on one side or the other. And they live somewhere in between, or they might hold sort of a mixed bag of views on abortion, which is what we find a lot. So for instance, what Michaela talked about earlier is that we know that 7 in 10 people support legal abortion, meaning that even self-identified conservatives may have more complex views on abortion and reproductive health care than the simple pro-life language might imply. For instance, conservative darling Tomi Lahren is pro-choice, right? So that right there in and of itself is a tension in the values that she holds. So the big takeaway here is that we're trying to really dig deeper into people's political beliefs, and that often reveals a lot of tension and contradiction, but it also reveals potential for movement. So we want to have a productive conversation. We want to find and push on these pressure points, and we want to also be able to recognize when people are being actively hostile or unreceptive to our conversation, and make sure that we are exiting those conversations and not, sharing our personal stories in an unsafe environment, that type of thing. So one of the best tools that we have to sort of prompt other people to share their stories is what we like to call the cone of curiosity, which is a model for active listening and asking the right questions. And that is on the next slide. So again, we want to be really genuine in our conversations with folks, and we really want to be listening to them as they're sharing our stories with us. And like I said before, folks really can tell if you're being genuine versus when you're just nodding along or when you're sort of waiting to get in your talking point. So this method of staying really curious and asking probing questions takes a lot of practice to approach conversations in this way. Rather than as simply a canvasser, or what I find myself wanting to do oftentimes is enter conversations as a debater. So really, really trying to fight the instinct of waiting for someone to finish talking so that you can respond with a reaction to what they're saying. So you really want to try to avoid that, stay curious. When in doubt, ask a question. And again, it's about reflecting on the tension between our values that pushes folks towards change. And we know that reflecting on our emotions about these values is a key part of that reflecting process. So we're really asking questions to help promote folks to self-reflect once we leave the conversation. So this is all about, like I said, planting seeds in order for them to sort of do their own personal growth. Another like way to say that is that we're trying to, this model is about digging 1 6-foot hole and not 6 1-foot holes. So we're really, really trying to get the level of depth that allows us to move people. And like I said, that takes real genuine curiosity. So the cone of curiosity is all about sort of starting with a broader question and then narrowing it down into what people are trying to express when they're talking about their value system. So at the top of the cone of curiosity, like, could you tell me about a specific time when you changed your mind about a political issue? Or can you tell me about a specific time when you felt shame and stigma? Right? So these are really, really broad level questions. And then you might sort of narrow that down into, you know, what happened? What did it feel like when that happened to you? That kind of thing. Yeah, so this is, like I said, all about trying to get people to talk about how things have impacted them and to have you sort of build an emotional connection with them. Next slide. And this is my last slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about agitation. So agitation sort of builds on the foundation that we've laid with our cone of curiosity, with our attempt to sort of build an emotional connection. Agitation allows you to move forward on the rapport that you've built while having a conversation. So it allows you to sort of gently push someone without shutting the conversation down or turning it into a fight or a debate. It's a way for us to respond and dig into some of the harder things that we hear and the things that we want to push back against gently. So it's really about where are they now versus where do they want themselves to be, because often what people describe as their values are not actually what they're living. So a lot of people will say, I personally would never have an abortion, but I believe that, politicians shouldn't be making restrictions on abortion. So that, right, those are sort of values that are in tension with each other. So we really want to push into why somebody might feel that way and get them to sort of personalize it a little bit more. Like I said, this brings out tensions in a really healthy way. It motivates people towards change versus us coming at conversations from a shame and humiliation standpoint. And one thing I really, really love about the reproductive health rights and justice movement is that nothing in our movement is built around shame and stigma. Everything is about trying to get away from that. It's not a good motivator for people. We really want to hold people to their values, but we are not trying to humiliate them by, calling them not smart, calling them uneducated, that kind of thing. Like, we're really trying to hold space for people to be where they are while gently pushing them to think a little bit more about the value systems that they hold. So people change when they're uncomfortable, and we want to push them to live in that discomfort. Discomfort is not a reason to pivot the conversation. It is a reason to push. But being able to distinguish between discomfort and hostility is sort of the biggest key takeaway, right? Is you really want to be able to tell if somebody is engaging with you in good faith versus if they're trying to play a game of gotcha with you. So there's a lot of keywords that you can sort of listen for, like taxpayer funded abortion is sort of a big red flag for me when I'm talking to people. If folks have really sort of internalized the talking points of the anti-choice movement, there's usually not going to be a lot of space there for me to agitate and gently push the conversation. And those will be times when you need to pivot, or even times when you may need to bail. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Rae for tactics on how to actually shut down an unproductive conversation, or how to pivot away from some misconceptions.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So I guess the biggest thing now, right? You've heard about the legislation, You kind of know what's been going on in Virginia, what's going on nationally, right? Now you're going to be having these conversations. Why? One, you're not really going to have a lot of time to practice, right? Few people want to like spitball their opinions about abortion, right? So in these spaces, in the breakout rooms and here, that's where you're going to be able to say like, well, I once heard this thing. Is this true? Or my mom once said this happened, or you know what I mean? Whatever it could be. Because 9 times out of 10, if we ask the question, is this factually accurate? Doesn't sound right? Maybe it's not. Maybe this feels weird, right? Usually it is, because it typically is something that refutes the safety of abortion, the fact that abortion is healthcare, and it takes away that individual from the conversation, right? So if you're able to ask that question and you're able to also say, I want to have this conversation with empathy and respect at the core, and I know that the other person is likely in that place too, right? Someone is calling you names. This is not a fruitful discussion. You don't have to call someone out their name. You don't have to make someone feel bad, but you can say, you know, there's a lot of people who feel the way you do. I can tell you from my experience, I really want, you know, individuals who make the decision to have an abortion to be able to do that with love and respect of those that they know and trust, right? Period, right? You're speaking from a place of values. You're centering the person. You're not using gendered language, right? You're really doing all of the things, right, that end stigma, and you're just having a normal, nice conversation. But you're also bridging, right? You're like, here's the bridge, right? Here's where our common ground is, but also we're going to talk about something else. Maybe we can agree on transportation, you know, something, a different topic. But really, when we're talking, right, it's because you are activists, right? And you are the ones who are probably going to be most trusted, right, as sources of information. So it's going to be really important for you to be able to bust myths also. One myth, obviously, is safety. Other myths are that, you know, only women have abortions. The one thing about these things, even though I'm restating them, is you don't want to restate them, right? Because they're mostly nonsense. And when you're able to restate the facts, you're able to take more control of the conversation and be more of a trusted messenger. So that's really the long and the short of it. Some bridges and pivots that are really, that are my go-tos, right? I will say, you know, or look, right? Sometimes you just need to level set. Sometimes people, you know, their emotions are taking over. This is a really personal, complicated, complex decision, right? And that makes people feel a lot of different ways. And what your job is, right, as the source of correct information is to say, you know what, like, let's get back to brass tacks here, right? At the center of this is an individual who has made the decision to have an abortion, right? That person deserves to be able to access their abortion, to be able to, you know, drive under 6 hours to get their care, you know, to be able to afford their abortion procedure, regardless of where they live, their race, their socioeconomic status, right? Their gender identity, their immigration or migration status. These are all the things that actually do impact your ability to get healthcare, especially reproductive healthcare, right? And abortion care. When we're able to normalize all of these things because they are normal, because 1 in 4 people have abortions, 1 in 4. There's 42 people on here, and math is not my strong suit. But there are folks on this call who know exactly what this issue means what it means to them, how it has affected others around them. And it's really hard to talk about that kind of stuff. So given all of the tools that Michaela, that Anna, that Lucy, that Han have all shared, right? You're able to craft your story to recenter that person, to bust stigma and correct misinformation.
Everybody in the room, have a great evening.